on BBC Two.
Now on BBC One, Panorama with Peter Hounam.
Barry Owens is renting an office for his new training company. All he needs is a telephone and a postal address.
Morning, Mr. Cohen, Barry Owens.
In an exercise for Panorama, he's going to show how it's possible to make hundreds of thousands of pounds out of the government schemes to train the long-term unemployed. He doesn't need any training facilities or workshops, and he isn't going to offer any new training. Tonight, Panorama asks whether the £2 billion drive to reskill the unemployed is in danger of turning into gravy training.
All I did was weed a trap. Every day, all I was weeding a trap. It was just a mundane and very stupid sort of thing that I was doing day after day.
The depressing reality of too many schemes run for the long-term unemployed is also very bad news for the economy. While the jobs available in traditional industries have shrunk dramatically, some developing sectors of the economy have trouble recruiting enough skilled labour. Albion Press Metal make parts for the motor industry, and like many high-tech companies, they can't find enough local people with the skills they need.
The most important commodity every company has is its workforce. And if you want to get the best, the very best from the workforce, and that is from me downwards, it's not just on the shop floor, everybody does need to have a certain amount of training. There are new skills to be gained, new technologies to be learned, and if you don't train, then that message is never conveyed across. If you look at the skills that are required to operate in this company now, I can't get them locally. I have to train them. I have to bring people in and train them. If I stop training, quality suffers, and ultimately my customers will suffer.
Albion is now part of the German engineering giant Thyssen, and their attitude to training is typical of many continental manufacturers. But in Britain, critics have complained for decades about the lack of commitment to training those in and out of work.
Just in time is very much a pull system.
By comparison with its European competitors, Britain still has one of the worst records on training. The bodies set up to tackle this problem are the Training and Enterprise Councils, or TECs. This old silk mill in Brighouse is a reminder of Britain's industrial past. The looms were ripped out a long time ago, and it is now the headquarters of the Training and Enterprise Council for this part of Yorkshire. Amid a fanfare of publicity, the TECs were formed in 1990 to answer the skills deficit. 82 of them have now been formed, combining local regeneration with the crucial role of delivering government training schemes. 4 years ago, this video from the Employment Department proclaimed the commitment of Mrs. Thatcher's government to the new TEC mission.
Booming Britain in the late 80s. The transformation of our economy in this decade is the talk of the world.
Training and Enterprise Councils provide a unique opportunity to shape the training and enterprise system for the next decade and to build a new partnership between government, business and the wider community.
The question is, where will the skilled people come from?
Privatisation of training provision was the government's answer, using TECs as its agents for handing out training contracts. The importance attached to the TECs was echoed by leading businessmen, including the boss of Wembley Stadium.
If, over a period of 3 generations, a country grows at 1% less than its competitors, over that period of time, it will go from number 1 in the world to number 20. And that's what's happened to the United Kingdom.
As private companies, the TECs were to have boards of directors, largely drawn from local businessmen. The appeal was led by the then Prime Minister.
To be a Training and Enterprise Council director is a great responsibility. It's also a great opportunity. But we shall need your best people, please. Your best people.
So how well is the new system working? We spoke to two experienced tradesmen who joined tech schemes after they had been unemployed for 6 months. The techs received money for schemes called employment training and employment action, which was intended to maintain skills and get the unemployed back into work. The participants got £10 a week on top of their dole money. But some projects bore little relation to people's skills or needs. Dave Love was an experienced paint sprayer who signed up for employment action.
What attracted me was the £10 extra. And then when I went to inquire, I was led to believe that what you'd get is in training as well, plus an up-to-date CV and a record to put on why you're not employed.
Employment training and employment action were later amalgamated into training for work. This is intended to provide training or structured work activity. Peter Sadd joined this new scheme.
I thought with joining this training for work scheme, I'd sort of be able to better myself in the sort of hope of finding work after I'd done the course and probably gain some additional skills and some training. And at the interview, I was initially told that I'd be going to Chapel Brampton to work on engines, carriages, and sort of do various maintenance work and things over there.
Last year, Jasmire, a provider of training services, sent 10 unemployed people to Chapel Brampton, a private railway run by enthusiasts who were grateful for the free labour. But did the scheme help the men get work?
Once they found out I was a painter, a sprayer, they told me I was going to go on a railway painting carriages, etc. I went up to this railway and all I did was weed a track.
You weeded the track?
Weeded the track for
How
6
long?
months, every day. It was just a mundane and very stupid sort of thing that I was doing day after day.
Jasmire's input was limited mainly to supplying the labour and occasional supervision, but they were getting money for the men each week.
We were told by some of the tech staff that Jasmire were getting £45 per person per week on a head count.
And what were Jasmire doing for £45 a week?
Basically nothing. We very, very seldom see any of Jasmire at all.
How do you feel about the training for work scheme now?
Terribly disappointing. Some of the people that have been on here for 12 months went away absolutely disgusted in the scheme, and I feel the same way. When they found out I could plaster, and I used to be a plasterer, they asked me to go over to their offices and plaster the director's office for them. So I thought they were just abusing my skill for their benefit.
So you actually did work at Jasmire's own premises?
Yeah, I didn't realise it was Jasmire until I arrived on site.
What did you get paid by Jasmire for?
Absolutely nothing.
After the scheme finished, they went back on the dole, and months later they are still bitter. They feel that far from improving their employability, the experience prevented them looking for work.
Well, after I'd done my 12 months to come off the scheme and started going out every day looking, I got employment again. And I honestly believe if I hadn't done the 12 months on that scheme, I'd been back in work quicker.
So what was the scheme meant to do? We approached Jasmire for an interview, but they declined our numerous requests. But they told us they were committed to helping the long-term unemployed. The project at Chapel Brampton was never meant to include training, and that no one from Jasmire has ever said otherwise. The plastering work was authorised by the local Training and Enterprise Council, and that the company received £35 per week per person for those on the Chapel Brampton scheme. Jasmire's funders, Northampton Tech, defended the company and the scheme offered. They said,
Employment action was brought under the administrative heading of Training for Work, but remained a programme of project-based work experience.
They went on to say it was never designed to provide vocational training. The sorts of projects Dave Love and Peter Sadd attended, though widely criticised, are still in existence. Today's participants are among the 440,000 people on various Training for Work and youth training schemes.
On one level, they are genuinely about trying to improve the skill levels of the British economy. Unfortunately, the reality as well is that they are about how you manage the social and political consequences of unemployment by actually drawing lots of unemployed people off the register, unfortunately putting them into schemes which don't lead anywhere.
Many of the schemes may be unhelpful as far as the participants are concerned, but one result is that they disappear from the unemployment total. Critics say this is the main reason the government runs its training schemes.
Ironically, people on government training schemes not only come off the unemployment register, but they are also included as people at work. So for the cost of an extra tenner, the government gets a double effect. It reduces the unemployment count on one side and increases the number in work on the other. For the unemployed person, they still get a gyro.
Alistair Graham, former trade union leader and director of the Industrial Society, is now chief executive of the Tech in Brighouse. He says the Techs are doing the best they can, but there have been unforeseen changes.
They always knew that they had to deal with a serious number of long-term unemployed people. I think what has happened since the 3 to 4 years that Techs have been in existence is the labour market has dramatically changed, where the vast bulk of new jobs coming along are part-time jobs, mainly filled by female employees. And we've got a growing crisis of employment, both for young males and for males who've been unemployed for a long period of time. And I think the government, if it's concerned to ensure that the unemployed don't become isolated from the mainstream of British society, have to allocate substantial resources to deal with this problem.
The government has known for a long time that it has been underfunding training providers. More than 2 years ago, it commissioned a report from the accountants, Coopers and Lybrand, which showed that good training companies were going out of business and others couldn't make a profit. Since then, funding levels have declined. This report has never been made public. The confidential document's conclusion was unambiguous.
Providers cannot continue to operate at a loss, and therefore they require some additional resources to ensure their continued viability.
Since then, things have got even worse. The annual tech budget is around £2 billion, but it has fallen since 1989 by £1 billion in real terms. Around 80% of this is allocated to the tech's different training responsibilities. By most definitions, Vector Training in Liverpool are doing a good job, but they're finding it hard to survive. One of their courses is a workshop in basic motor mechanics skills. For this, the tech allows them £26 per week per trainee.
Prior to the tech initiative, we used to get additional funding for protective clothing, the hard boots, the overalls. We now have to provide the protective clothing, the hard boots, the overalls out of that unit cost.
Out of £26 a week?
Yes.
Is it possible really to do that?
No. As an organisation, we are actually currently supplementing the funding for this particular training programme.
What sort of training qualifications will the people here get?
It's an MVQ level 1, which is the basic rudiments of motor vehicle maintenance.
So will the people who come out of here be equipped to go and work in a garage as a fitter?
Not at level 1, because it would not be recognised as a craft level.
So what is the purpose of providing them with MVQ level 1 in your view?
It's a target for the government.
But to offer a qualification which should enable the trainees to get a job is beyond the resources allowed them by the tech.
It is extremely capital intensive, so there would need to be that investment with up-to-date state-of-the-art equipment. If we are going to be contracting with the tech, then we will have to make sure that we have those facilities in place.
Think of training. That's from the individual sense. Look, think from a team sense, training from a team sense.
Previous experience that you've got which is relevant to the job.
Vector are also suffering from the trend towards output-related funding. The tech withholds some money until a positive outcome is achieved in the form of a job or a qualification obtained by the trainee. It sounds all right, but can impose impossible strains on cash-strapped providers.
We need 100% money up front to develop the programme, to put the resources where they're needed, from day one when the trainee starts the programme.
Go for the obvious ones first. Notice.
Many of Vector's trainees are people with learning disabilities or special needs, precisely the ones who need most attention, but they don't always deliver the paper qualifications which are increasingly necessary to secure funding. Far from upgrading their training facilities, Vector has had to make across-the-board staff cuts as their funding has been slashed.
we are down to the bare minimum. So from an organisation of 45, I was employing 45 people, we are now down to 15.
Vector Training get their money from Merseyside Tech, and we spoke to its chief executive, Linda Bloomfield.
We're just starting the 94-95 budget year, and in that year we will actually have a smaller budget than that which we had for the year that's just finished. And the main reduction is in the area of training for adults.
What are the implications for you of your tech getting less money this year than last year?
We'll certainly be offering fewer places for adults, but we'll still have a significant sized programme. We will be maintaining to our suppliers the level of pricing that we offered them in 93-94.
Despite that assurance, since we visited Vector Training, 23 out of these 38 trainees have been told they have to go, and weekly rates for 5 out of their 7 courses have been cut by up to 30%. Merseyside Tech do not dispute these cuts, but they have told Panorama,
the mix of contracts with regard to the occupational areas to be covered, the number of weeks, outputs and trainees is often very different. In the case of Vector, the 94-95 mix of contracts differs from that in 93-94, making comparison difficult.
One result of the pressure to perform is that more money goes to the trainees most likely to deliver positive outcomes, which risks neglecting those who need training the most.
The higher cost trainees, those trainees that demand, need more support, they're the people that lose out because it's not cost effective for training providers to take them on. Those people who have been unemployed for over 12 months used to represent 50% of employment training when it first started. They now only represent 1/3 of training for work.
Well, particularly as far as long-term unemployed people, we are getting very near the bone as far as the funding for those people are concerned.
So really, are you at rock bottom now in funding levels for training for work?
I sincerely hope that the government realise that they've gone as far as they can, and if anything, they should be looking for additional resources, of course, depending on what the levels of unemployment are over the next year.
Although the squeeze is making it difficult for the techs to fund good training courses, there are further questions about whether the techs are making best use of their money and who they are answerable to. Some of the tech's earliest supporters are concerned that the government's commitment is waning. 3 years after his participation in the tech launch video, Sir Brian Wolfson was critical of both government and techs.
We now have a movement fighting to make do with the crumbs left on the table. Unless the government gets its act together, it will never deliver to the nation the promise that was so nearly ours.
A, there's not enough money, but that's one issue, and B, there's still too much bureaucracy, and that's another issue. But the real issue is the management of the system, and it's how you get the people who aren't doing what they should be doing to do what they should be doing. That's the issue today. So it's not just the money you spend, it's how well you spend and utilise what you're already spending, and in addition what you add to it.
Are you saying they're failing on both scores?
I'm not saying they're failing, I'm saying we could do better on both scores.
Many techs have done some very interesting and exciting things, but at the end of the day, they're private companies drawn predominantly from local businessmen, and it is predominantly businessmen, and we don't feel that, generally speaking, there is sufficient accountability to the local community and to Parliament in terms of what they do with the cash.
A recent Public Accounts Committee report on
serious failures in administrative and financial systems and controls within departments and other public bodies
gave as an example
large amounts of doubtful and incorrect payments to training providers and to training and enterprise councils.
What we have found, and if you look at the official employment department figures, is that something like only 40% of the cost to the department ends up with the training provider. That means there's another 60% going on other functions. Only 40% is there available to do the actual training.
A Financial Times survey last year showed that almost half the tech directors regard training the unemployed as bottom of their list of priorities. So are the techs the right people to be delivering training programs? Professor Robert Bennett of the London School of Economics recently produced a report highlighting management inefficiency and the diversion of training money to non-training uses.
We do suggest in our report that the system at the moment is not working properly, and there are certain crucial design defects that could be overcome by government if they wish to. So we feel that now is the time to do that. They've been 3 years in existence, over 3 years in some cases. 3 years is a long time in business. Many businesses have gone bust in the last 3 years. I don't think techs have got a particularly cherished existence that means they should be immune from major restructuring exercises, particularly looking at their own management efficiency. The output-related funding system has given incentives to the providers and to the techs to generate low-cost programs which have given back to the techs surpluses, and there are in the tech system considerable surpluses in their accounts.
This is profits, isn't it?
They are surpluses saved from programs which would in a private sector actually be like a profit, yes.
But why should you be making surpluses out of training for work funding and then using that money for other things?
Because part of our remit is to improve the success of the local economy, to create jobs. If we don't do that, then the long-term unemployed will not have jobs to move into. If I can give you a small example. We use part of our enterprise monies to assist a machine tool company to move from Hertfordshire to Halifax, where there's a machine tool industry, to take over a company that was going to go out of business and safeguard 220 skilled jobs.
The criticisms don't stop at the divided role of the techs. Many of the tech chief executives have already voted with their feet. In the 4 years since the techs were established, 35 out of 82 have resigned or been sacked.
If you look at those 35, 20 of them were civil servants who were on secondment from the civil service. And they had the freedom to decide whether to stay as chief executive of the tech, if the tech board wanted them, or to go back to the civil service. Many of them decided to go back to the civil service. Many of them decided to stay and are absolutely first-class chief executives. The others, if you look at 15 out of 82, well, that really for new institutions that are getting off the ground, that seems to me a fairly modest turnover. I think we're looking at reasonable stability.
It's not just tech chiefs who leave the field. Last year saw the collapse of Astra, the leading provider of training for work. It used to train more than 100,000 people a year in 45 purpose-built centres like this one in South London. Astra had assets valued at £100 million. Astra's fall was mainly blamed on the 40% cut in the adult training budget since 1989. Half of the training centres are now empty. Few people seemed interested at the time, but after Astra had gone bust, the Labour Party set up an inquiry.
In a nutshell, what was happening there is that any training organisation, but Astra in particular, were arranging with employers, sometimes arranging with themselves, to take their former trainees onto the payroll, but only for a limited number of days. As long as people were in work on the 13th week after their training course had finished, that qualified Astra as the training agency for a bonus payment. And people knew this was going on, I'm afraid to say. People at a high level knew this was going on and chose not to act to prevent it.
Financial cuts were driving Astra to work the system of output-related funding in order to claim performance payments. By putting its own former trainees onto the payroll for just a few days, Astra qualified for a bonus of up to £1,000 per trainee. Only last week, a branch of the nationwide training company JHP was reported to be claiming bonuses for qualifications achieved by non-existent trainees. And there are even bigger rackets going on which aren't even illegal. The pressure to show results is causing some techs to cut corners. Taxpayers' money, earmarked for the long-term unemployed, is being handed over to employers who have well-established training schemes. Because their trainees already have jobs, the techs can count them as positive outcomes. In effect, they are buying results off the shelf.
just in the process of starting up a training company. Obviously, the biggest problem they face.
Barry Owens used to be involved with such a scheme. He revealed to Panorama how the changing system of training has led to new opportunities to work the system.
And you tell me, is there any paperwork involved in meeting?
Owens was involved with a company called Touchstone Training, which operates out of this nondescript office. It was set up to exploit the tech's need for results, but have no training facilities of its own. Instead, it cashed in on the training and jobs already taken up by the unemployed.
If they start work with an employer, they can still receive training and assessment from a training company and receive funding for doing so, despite the fact the person is actually employed by a third party. There's some organisations, such as Touchstone Training, who will give 50% of all funding received. In effect, they will evenly split the money between themselves and the retailer.
Barry Owens showed us a presentation pack used by Touchstone in making a pitch to a prospective partner. This one was to the DIY superstore Texas Home Care. Touchstone contact a supermarket to find out the location of a new store, which will anyway be recruiting and training people. They then approach the tech with the offer, guaranteeing the positive outcome the techs need. Touchstone themselves provide no training for the recruits, but get training funds from the tech, essentially for brokering the results. And no additional work will be done by the supermarket, which gets extra cash for doing what it was going to do anyway. Touchstone offered Texas a 50-50 division of the spoils. Texas confirmed to Panorama that such an approach had been made to them, but the deal was never concluded. Many other presentations were more successful.
What Touchstone, in fact, were offering the techs was something that they deemed a holy trinity. In any project and contract negotiation, they were offering the tech positive outcomes into jobs, positive outcomes into qualifications, and of course positive outcomes for even those people who left the supermarkets and gained employment elsewhere.
Are you telling me that the taxpayer in this country is subsidising their training programmes?
That's correct. You may as well put additional money into your trolley because it's going direct to the retailers anyway.
You have experience across the whole country. How widespread is this practice?
I really think there are very few techs who could hold their hands up who say they haven't actually been involved with this operation, or in fact other similar operations. Not just in retail marketplace, but anywhere where a new company opens up, a tech will approach that company and offer funding towards training.
We asked Touchstone for an interview. They declined, but told us they were providing a valuable service. They confirmed that
Touchstone secures financial assistance for the training of new recruits from techs, and contracts range from 6 to 26 weeks, with widely differing funding rates. In most cases, all training needs are catered for by the employer.
Touchstone has a training for work contract with Merseyside Tech. We asked its chief executive whether this was a proper use of public money.
The nature of the relationship between Touchstone and the people with whom they find opportunities for long-term unemployed is between them. Many employers will negotiate different scenarios. It depends upon the training that needs to be done for those individuals and for the amount of work that the agent is taking on in managing that training process.
But it's just, as far as the retailer is concerned, a straight bit of extra cash, because they're going to train these people anyway.
As I say, if they are recruiting long-term unemployed people, many of whom would not be considered by them at all, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years unemployed, then we will help them to recruit and train those people because they would not otherwise get a job. And that we consider to be very appropriate.
Well, as I say, in the situation that Touchstone were operating, these people were already being employed and already been selected by the store. They were simply going through the books, finding those that were eligible and taking the money.
And as I have said, if there is any instance of people abusing the ethos of that scheme, then we will investigate it.
Alistair Graham was forthright in his views on schemes such as those described by Barry Owens.
Well, that would be a fiddle. We're not interested in abuses of that sort, and we have no experience of them in this locality.
Barry Owens left Touchstone because he decided such activities were unacceptable. But he feels so strongly about exposing these sorts of schemes that he set up a fictitious company for us to show how easy it would be.
Prior to this, there's never ever been a company called Esperanto Training. It's my intention to create something which the techs will believe is a training company, but in doing so show just how shallow and how unprofessional the techs are, and also how keen they are to achieve their outcomes.
How do you know that this will be a success?
I am aware of other organisations and have worked with other organisations who have gone through exactly the same process, perhaps with a bit more money behind, perhaps £1,000, with which to launch the organisation. What I intend to show is how this can be done on a shoestring.
Hello.
My name's Barry Owens, Esperanto Training. Esperanto Training.
Sorry?
Esperanto Training. Can I speak to a contracts manager for TFW, please? I hope I have an unbelievable offer for you. Henderson Engineering are opening their site in your neck of the woods. The site's actually opening up just outside Bromley, near Telford, towards Cardiff. We've interviewed about 30 young people. What we put them through is the BS 4871 coding.
Write this down.
Sorry? Yeah.
Write this down. It's BS what?
They're employed from day one, and it's a guaranteed outcome.
Sounds very good.
Cost on TFW or YT, which would you prefer? If you felt it politically better to shove this through the YT route, we're happy.
Well, yeah, I mean, that could be an idea, actually. Would you be able to do that?
Oh, yes. Okay, let's throw a name on the donkey. If I were to say about 300 for a VQ2 and about 600 for a job. It's like playing Russian roulette this with someone who holds all the cards. So if your normal standard race is you're piling out at 455, I'm happy to sit with that. If I were to say a positive outcome on 500, training week for about 60, and an MVQ about 300, that's going to be there or thereabouts in the ballpark, isn't it?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Because I'm sure you need to check our bona fides. And...
Yeah, can I have your name again?
Yes, my name's Dave Taylor. I know.
All of the techs Owens contacted were ones who'd previously responded positively to Touchstone Training's approaches. This time he was describing an engineering company which was taking on 30 welders and providing training for them anyway. Merseyside Tech agreed to meet Owens and discuss his proposition. He recorded the meeting with a hidden camera.
If you need funding to help create the vacancies, then we can help with funding.
I need to be honest, we don't have that sort of financial problem. I'd love to say this, oh yes please, we need this money to help us. But we don't, these are jobs we're going to create anyway. I just thought in case there was anything additional we could have, the funding is in place.
Barry, how did it go?
Again, exceptionally well. In effect, if it would have been a legitimate company, we've been offered grants and facilities, possibly up to over £100,000 in worth.
What was the proposition that you put to them today?
Basically, that we would be employing 30 welders, and we would do so with or without their assistance. They happily agreed to fund the training we would provide, and additionally even find a way of funding the equipment for the trainees, or new employees, I should say.
Would any capital monies be available as well?
Yes, apparently Merseyside Tech have a special system whereby employers can approach the tech, and if they feel they can't afford to employ a person because of a shortage of equipment, a grant can be made available. I explained the fact that we weren't short of money and could employ these people and equip them totally. They found a way around this, not me, by suggesting that the people we're employing can actually approach and gain this funding on our behalf.
Well, why were they so eager to give you money when you didn't need it, so to speak?
This shows the tech to be a success. Again, it comes to the point we're offering the Holy Trilogy: outcomes, MVQs, and people into jobs, or apparently so.
I must say that we were very disappointed indeed that an approach which we took in good faith and dealt with in good faith did in fact turn out to be a hoax. I have no reservations about the way in which that approach was handled. What we did was we believed we had a company who was prepared to come and invest here in Merseyside and create 30 jobs for long-term unemployed people. In a purely exploratory discussion, we outlined the kind of resource that would be available to enable the company to do that. We explained that the unemployed people would have to be long-term unemployed and would have to come via the job centre network. And we also explained all the checks and contracting procedures which we would go through.
We made it perfectly clear that these people were not being recruited through the job centre network. They were going to be employed anyway by Henderson Engineering. In other words, here was a company that was going to train people anyway. It was perfectly capable of funding it itself, getting government funds basically as an extra bonus.
That is not our interpretation of the case that was presented to us. We often work with employers who are thinking of locating and establishing themselves in Merseyside, and we work with our partners to ensure that, should that happen, unemployed people get recruited and trained into those vacancies, and that is what we believed was to be the case here.
There's a growing controversy over these so-called employed status schemes. Far away from companies allegedly claiming money for minimal extra work, other respected training organisations are finding it hard to keep going. Camden Training Centre is holding an awards ceremony.
We hold certificate presentations to successful trainees regularly, and that is, in a sense, the culmination of the training. 85% and more of the trainees who complete their programmes at this centre gain a nationally recognised vocational qualification.
I'm a BT man, multi-skill. That's what Camden has done for me. This place is definitely a good place.
But since we filmed, the latest round of budget cuts has made it impossible for Camden to continue its programme of youth training. And now a third of their staff will no longer be helping the unemployed because they're joining them. So there's a little less chance of good training, but still plenty of opportunities for the gravy trainers.
Panorama will be back in 2 weeks' time.